Next up, we shall bring on Hugo Greenhalgh. If you take a seat as well, Rahimo, that'd be great.
Hi guys, I'm Hugo. I'm not going to stand here and talk to you about specific policies. You can all read my manifesto online if you're interested. I want to tell you why I'm the best candidate to be Leeds student editor. I'm currently the sports editor of the paper, so I get to engage directly with thousands of students every week, and this is something I'd like to continue doing if I were to become editor. I've had endorsements from a number of sports clubs and societies. They've been delighted with our coverage, and they know that I'm capable of more. One of the ways I want to increase interactivity with the paper and engagement is by expanding and improving our website. I currently run a football blog that gets a similar amount of hits to Leeds student, and I work every week to make sure this number is increasing. I also lead a team of writers and organise the direction of this website. I've also made a huge effort to get to know the inner workings of the paper this year, as well as writing for multiple sections, including news. I feel the strong relationships I've built with the editorial team have given me valuable insight into Leeds student. This has shown me what I can do to improve the paper even more next year. All this experience means that I'm ready to hit the ground running next year. Thank you. Think big, vote huge.
Hugo Greenhalgh there. The third and final candidate now for the position of Leeds student editor here on Leeds LUU is Becky Smith.
Hi everyone, I'm Becky Smith. This year as LS1 Features Editor, I'm responsible for the more serious double spread features as well as the Sock of the Week column, and I'm also co-editor of Lippy. If elected, I want to make Leeds Student more professional and more representative of all the different students at Leeds. My manifesto is less about big, drastic changes and more about simple, practical, well thought through changes to improve Leeds Student as a society and as a paper. I'm really committed to high quality journalism. And so I want to offer training for our writers and editors to give them more opportunities to improve their skills and also to ensure that we produce really engaging, high-quality content every week. I want every student to feel that Leeds Student is relevant to them, so offer more opportunities to get involved, including more blogs on the website. And finally, I want to increase more open communication and build lasting relationships with students and societies so that they feel that they can have their say in how their student is run. Thanks very much.
Becky Smith, the third and final candidate for the position of Leeds student editor. If you could sit to my right, Becky, that'd be brilliant. So before we move on to questions of the candidates, we have some set questions, and as I say, you can tweet us with hashtag LeadLUU and at Leeds Student TV on Twitter. Before we do move on to that, if we do take questions from the audience or indeed from the candidates, just a reminder, no swearing, please. Excellent. Okay, let's move on to our first question. Each of you will get an opportunity to answer the questions, and who answers first will be randomised so that nobody is pressured into answering first every single time. The first question I'm going to put to you, Becky. Now, lots of you talked about the journalism itself and the news of the Leeds student. Becky, particularly, you talked of high-quality journalism. A question is, how will you maintain such high-quality journalistic standards, maybe on the grounds of ethics as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important question. I've talked about having writers' workshops as well already, and I also want to have general journalism skills workshops, so training people not just in how to write, but also how to write really thoroughly researched articles, and also have things like interview skills workshops. I want to introduce the position of senior reporter this year, so that we can have students who focus more on our big investigations and on researching news and writing news pieces, so that our editors can concentrate more on editing rather than having to write everything and edit it at the same time, because that's how you get things rushed and how you get mistakes. So yeah, just to focus on training and improving the structure of Leeds students so that we can be more thorough in our proofreading, our researching.
Okay, Becky, thank you very much. Rahima, we'll move on to you next. That's okay.
I think it's about two things. I think it's about if you want high quality journalism, you need an editor who's experienced. So I talked about my experience at Leeds Student and also outside. I'm really committed to being a journalist, so I know about what counts as high quality journalism, but then it's also about the team that you've got. So I talked about widening participation, and the more people you have on the paper, the higher the quality of the content. So if you've got people with specialisms and interests and people who can bring you news that's hard-hitting and worth being in the paper, then that's all a good thing. A lot of people have also brought up proofreading and the fact that there are often mistakes in Leeds Student. And I think by widening participation, you've also got people who feel really passionately about things like grammar and spelling, who could come in on our deadline night and just proofread pages. And I think all of that helps to make Leeds Student more professional.
Okay, and finally, Hugo.
Yeah, I'm also looking to restructure the news section of the paper. I want to create news reporters who would act as the eyes and ears on campus, bringing in the most interesting, most relevant stories to students. I think it's also about consultation. That's one of the big things in my manifesto. I want to be talking to the most relevant societies to make sure we get accurate information when we're reporting a story.
Okay, thank you, Hugo. The next question is about sort of your audience and listening particularly to that audience. How much will you perhaps weight stories that you get in from audience, perhaps out and about, tweeting you, etc.? Is that given a lot of weighting in your ideal Leeds student? We'll start with you, Rahima.
The more stories, the better. So our news team are really overworked, and the idea is that all of our stories should come from the student body, should come from our writers. So by making us more open and also using technology, so Twitter, and then also the idea that I have of online interactive feedback, people will be more engaged with the paper and realise how easy it is to come with a story. I think a lot of people don't even know where we work. So we're upstairs in the union. You can come in any time. And, you know, I think a lot of people have a news story, but they don't realise it. So, you know, it could be something that happened to your mate at a club, or, you know, you're talking to someone in a pub and they've got a really interesting story. I think often it's just about saying to someone, that would be really good in the paper, that would be really interesting for other students to know about. So I think most of our content should be coming from students outside of the paper, and it should be the people in the paper turning it into high-quality professional stories.
Hugo.
Well, I've talked a bit about my online experience in my speech at the start, but I think there's an even more basic way that people can get in touch with us. And one of my big policies is to introduce a News Now hotline. This would be a well-publicised number where people could reach the office directly and let us know when they have a story, so we'd never miss any of the big news on campus.
Okay, and finally, Becky.
Yeah, consultation is always also a really important part of my manifesto, and so I want to introduce open forums so that we can communicate more openly with societies and with students, so that anyone can come along and give feedback about any issues they have with the paper and also any suggestions for content that we should have. I want to introduce press release training for societies, teach them how to create a really good press release for events that they're doing that could be turned into news, and then have an online content form where they can submit this to us so that we can come and cover their stories, and also so that any student who has news can submit that as well. I want to introduce regular feedback surveys as well so that people can tell us how we're doing, and I think that's a really good way of engaging with our audience. In terms of Twitter, which you mentioned, at the moment our Twitter feed is just giving out stories that we're doing, and I think we could do a lot more with that. We could have someone dedicated to dealing with the social media on Leeds Student and communicating with students so that we can pick up on stories that are out there.
Okay, Becky, thank you very much. Next up, now this year, over the course of sort of the year for the Leeds Student, and indeed for all of the media societies and any society within the union, we've had the no platform policy referendum. Now, sort of going on from that, the Leeds Student obviously sort of backed, as we all seen, that we should vote no against this. The question here is, should the Leeds Student actively back certain motions, individuals or campaigns, such as the no platform policy? Should they be biased in a certain way? We'll start with Hugo, please.
Well, I think when it's a motion that affects us so directly, it's something we had to take a stance on, and it's something I'd continue to do if I were to become editor.
Okay, and you, Becky?
Yeah, I absolutely agree that I think we were right to back that campaign because it was something that directly affected us. I think it's something that's important to remember, that we backed the campaign not necessarily because we want to interview fascists every week, but it's something that we feel is important, that we should have the editorial freedom to decide. and we should use things like open forums and consultation to gauge student opinion on things like that. In terms of backing certain campaigns, I think that it would be wrong for us to be biased to back campaigns that weren't directly affected to us. So I think it would be wrong for us to endorse particular candidates or anything like that because of our influence, and I think that news should be unbiased.
Okay, and finally, Rahima, same question.
So I ran that campaign, and so obviously I feel really strongly that Leeds Student should have backed the campaign. It was going to severely affect press freedom, not just our society, but it was a collective effort with all of the media societies. But I kind of disagree with Becky, and I think that the paper should run other campaigns for issues that affect students. So if we've got a story in the paper about the fact that the lifts don't work for disabled people in the union, why not run a campaign? The paper's got a massive readership. Use that to our advantage. But yeah, in this case, I think we were right. We were right to back that campaign and use the influence that we have on campus.
Okay, Becky, have you got any response to that? Rahima disagreeing with you there. Do you think perhaps certain campaigns should be backed at all?
Yeah, it's interesting that you said you would disagree with me, Rahima. I was referring to particular campaigns which affect students, particular students. If it's something that would benefit students in Leeds in general, if it's something that's very obviously of benefit to students, such as you mentioned, lifts for disabled people, I think that's a very easy decision. I think that that's something that we could back. I think it gets more complicated when opinion is divided. And I think that we should be careful about influencing students too much, and I think that we should trust students to make up their own minds.
And finally, would you like to build anything on your opinion there, Hugo, on that?
I think, yeah, the sort of causes that Rahima mentions are definitely worth some column inches in the paper.
Okay, great. One more set question before we move on to Twitter and audience questions. If you have a question for us, do make sure you tweet us. You can use the Twitter handle @LeedsStudentTV, or you can use the hashtag. It's LeadLUU. Okay then, the final question is a very broad one that's been set, and that is, where should the focus lie for student news? Should it be sort of a more lighter, more entertainment-y, show-busy thing, or should the serious stories get a big chunk in the paper? We'll go back to Becky to begin, please.
To be honest, I don't think that it has to be one or the other. I think that we should be primarily accountable to students, and so that we should be reporting on issues that are important to students and that affect students, and I think that that will be the basis for our news. I think that there is room in the paper for slightly longer stories, meatier stories, alongside the kind of short news nibs that we have at the moment. But I think also, as Rahima mentioned earlier, a lot of people don't realise that our LS2 magazine is a separate pullout, and that's where a lot of our sort of lighter entertainment, as well as the kind of more serious features that I write and I'm in charge of, are. So I think that we can cater for a range of students and a range of different types of news and stories, and I'd like to redesign LS2 to reflect that. But I'd like to maintain the variety of different stories that we have at the moment and build on that.
Rahima.
So I think Leeds Student has a really solid reputation for having hard-hitting news that isn't sensationalised. I think if people want that kind of thing, then they'll go to the tab. I think what we've got in our paper has a lot of substance to it. And at the end of the day, it is a newspaper. So I think the key thing is, what's your front page story? Why do people pick it up? Because they relate to what's on the front page. I also want to have LS2 more obviously a pullout, because I think there are two different kinds of reader. So there are a lot of people who would go first to news or comment or debate or science, and then there are people who are more interested in fashion and music. And if you're more interested in that, pull out the magazine and throw the rest away, and it would just appeal to a completely different kind of reader. So I think there's space for both, but in terms of the light-hearted stuff, it still has to be quality content. You can't get away with cheating students into reading articles that have no substance to them.
And finally, Hugo.
Yeah, I think we can strike a good balance, because yes, I've talked about how I want to restructure news and make sure we do get in the most interesting, most accurate stories. But then you also have page 3, which is a great space for more light-hearted stories. I thought this was a question specifically about news, but we seem to have moved on to LS2 as well. Seems like a good chance to talk about what I would do with LS2. I want to rebrand it, give it its own identity, and I also want to make an events page as a central pullout that people can put on their walls. It's going to be a great space to promote and publicise society's events on campus.
Okay, Hugo, thank you very much. We're going to open it up to the floor and the Twitter sphere now. Quick reminder before we do that of all of our candidates. Next to me here, we have Rahima Figueiredo. We have over there Hugo Greenhalgh, and we have Becky Smith here, all running for the position of Leeds Student Editor. So, let's turn to the floor. Any questions from the audience at the moment? Right to the back. Can we get a mic there?
Hello. Question to all the candidates. What do you think of the tab and how it poses your position with the paper, really?
Good question. Let's start with Rahima.
So in terms of my personal taste, I've got nothing against tabloids. I think they do what they do very well. They sell a lot of papers. But I think what the tab is lacking is substance, which is what I've already talked about. So I think what you get with the tab is a really good headline, and you think, wow, that sounds really interesting. And then by the time you get to the third sentence, you realise it's based on memes or something on Facebook, and it hasn't actually got any weight to it. So I think we do need to make sure that we're appealing to a broad audience, so not just people who buy broadsheets, but also people who might read tabloids. But in terms of the tab, I think it's just lacking in hard-hitting news stories.
Okay, next up, let's have Hugo.
Yes, I'd echo that. I think Leeds Student should be the first port of call for serious news, but I think the Leeds tab is very good at what it does. I do find some of the stories on there humorous. But, you know, we've had instances where we've published a news story and then the tab will run something very, very similar. And I think the Leeds Student should still remain the first port of call for that serious news. That said, we still get many more hits than Leeds tab, and I think it shows that people still want, you know, serious stuff too.
And Becky, same question.
Yeah, I think they're just two very different types of publication that possibly appeal to different types of reader. As for my personal taste, I'm more of a broadsheet person, and I feel quite strongly against, I feel that a strong news story should speak for itself. So I don't feel the need to sensationalise stories, which I think that the tab sometimes does, with attractive headlines, and then you realise that there's not often very much substance to it. One of the issues I do have with the tab is that they have published quite a few things in the past which are very misogynistic and very marginalising of particular groups of people, and that's not something that we have space for in Leeds Student. That's absolutely not what we're about. There have been some more positive things on there recently about, they published an article on FemSoc's recent campaign, which I think was really positive. So I think there is a move towards changing their image. That's what I've heard some people say. So that can only be a positive thing. But I think that they remain two separate organisations, and I don't think that we should feel that we're competing.
Thank you, Becky. A second question from the floor. Does anybody have one? Yes, at the front here.
In the previous year to this one, there were a number of articles which I thought were based on dodgy facts. You've got sort of uni tortures dogs, and you've got the whole sort of sex on campus articles, which I think was dealt with very insensitively, which, you know, some people on the panel might be implicated in fact. But my question is, what sort of direction would people take the paper in? Would it be more tabloidy, you know, and sort of sensationalising stories, perhaps sometimes getting it wrong? Or would it be, you know, what sort of paper would you aim to aspire to be like?
We've had quite a similar question already, but we'll start on Hugo, please, just briefly. Thank you.
I want to be about accuracy, I want to be about relevancy, I want to be talking to the appropriate people before a story like this is published. You know, if someone comes to us and says, yeah, there's cottaging going on in the toilets, okay, let's investigate, let's see if that is going on. Let's just not run with it for the sake of it and worry about the facts after. I want to be talking to the relevant people before these things are published to make sure no one's offended and make sure we are publishing accurate, relevant stories.
What paper would you base yourself on, says our question asker. If you'd like to answer that as well, Hugo, quickly.
A serious broadsheet such as The Guardian or The Times.
Okay, Becky.
Yeah, as I kind of covered this in my last question, but I feel that Leeds Student is tabloidy enough. I don't think it needs to be any more tabloidy. I think what we're good at is having really concise, well-written news that doesn't patronise the reader. So I don't think we should base ourselves on any one paper. I think that we should be aiming to have our own identity. I think it would be good to take inspiration from something like The Eye. I think that does that really well, and also from papers like The Guardian. As for sensationalism, I've said before that I think that it's not necessary, and we should be researching stories enough that we find strong news stories to report on. I think that introducing senior reporters and more training for writers and editors will help with this. I think as for the specific news stories you referred to, I think that they were reported on very poorly, and I think that they were ill-researched, particularly the cottaging story you're referring to. I think that if we hear a news tip about something like that, it's definitely worth investigating, and if it's something that affects students, we should report on it. But we should work very carefully to investigate properly, get all of the facts, and also work very carefully with relevant people, such as the faith reps, the welfare reps. That particular story you could have worked with LGBT on, not just to get the facts right, but I think we should also be sensitive about the language that we use, and we should get people who know about things like that to check it.
Okay, and finally, Rahima, please.
So I was one of the news editors last year, so I was involved with both of those stories. And I mean, there are two parts to your question. So for the first question, I think the key thing to remember with both of the ones that you mentioned is that they were newsworthy. The crux of the story was something that mattered to students, but it's the way that they were handled that then caused the upset. So I think, I mean, societies were consulted, but often there's this image of Leeds student as being a bit closed and a bit hostile and a bit above it all. And I think opening lines of communication would mean that we handled things in the right way. I think there's a sort of a line to draw between facts and also sensationalism. So those things, those facts were definitely newsworthy, but they were then sensationalised and written in a way that wasn't particularly helpful. But I think having our own investigations, so like does Uni Torture Dogs, is a really good thing. It makes the paper professional. It's what wins us awards as well, you know, doing our own journalism. And then in terms of what kind of paper I'd want us to be like, we're a free paper. Why do you pick up the Metro? Because it looks interesting, it looks fun, you don't have to pay for it. I think if you want to buy the Times, you want to buy the Guardian, go downstairs to Essentials and you pay money for it, for wordier articles. But if you want a free paper that's easy to digest but interesting, then we should be aiming for something more like the Metro, the Evening Standard.
Okay, excellent. Sadly, for this position, that is all we have time for. A couple of tweets have come in, and I'm sure our candidates will stick around if you have specific questions afterwards. Otherwise, you can check out the Leeds University Union website. That's leedsuniversityunion.org.uk to see the full manifestos. Also, we have manifesto overviews at lstv.co.uk too, where we round up all of the candidates' manifestos for each and every position. For now, though, let's give a round of applause for our Leeds student editors.
The Leadership Race 2013.
The candidates for Leeds student.
Okay, guys, if you are a candidate standing for the position of activities officer, if I could ask you to go take a seat in that area there. If you're here to support candidates, please come and take a seat as soon as we can. We will be going live in 4 minutes' time. 4 minutes' time.
Also, we've got a question from Sorensen saying, Uni Sport drives a lot of people to read the student, but the quality and coherence of reporting is poor. What would you do to improve it? We will get answers to all these questions later on in the day. Also, someone has got in touch saying they're not able to see all the hustings live here in the Union foyer. You can catch them all at www.lstv.co.uk or www.luu.org.uk on the front page there. Up next, though, we are going to be giving you a roundup of the manifestos for all the Leeds student editor candidates. Stay tuned, because after that we'll be having the activities question time.
iPhone app and live blogs for big events. Secondly, we have Hugo Greenhall, who wants a hotline that allows students to phone the paper with any breaking news, a new travel section in a redesigned LS2, and a weekly LS surgeries inviting students to talk with editors directly about the paper and any other issues. Lastly, we have Becky Smith, who wants training for societies on how to write a press release, introduction of a web editor to ensure all digital content is up to scratch, and more roles available in the form of senior reporters and online editors, giving rise to more in-depth investigation. Those were all your peers running for the lead student editor positions. Coming up later, we'll hear more about those running for education and union affairs positions.